Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, guys. Welcome back. I'm so glad that you're here today. So today we're going to talk to Julie Buttell. She is a physical therapist. She owns her own practice, and she is here to kind of talk to us about how to keep our kids active, not just like sports related active, just like movement active. She has a goal to just normalize and increase movement with families. She's also a mom and a dog mom, and she's going to talk to us today about the physical therapist perspective on keeping our kids healthy and active. With that, let's get to Julie.
Sure, absolutely. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to talk about like a lot of people just don't know what physical therapy is. And if I'm being totally honest, as I was getting ready for this podcast, I learned a lot about what your profession does. So I was also kind of in the dark. So like, tell us about like, what is physical therapy?
So I think the reason that a lot of people don't know what it is because it's a little bit of everything. We're a huge field and we do everything from like stroke rehabilitation to wound care to sports and performance. So it's a very vast field. But I think the best way to put it in a way that people could understand what we do is that we are experts, usually at the doctoral level, on the physical body. So no matter what goes either wrong with your physical body or what you want to optimize about your physical body, we are the experts in helping make that happen. So if you have pain or you're injured, we get you back to not having pain and doing what you want to do. If you don't have pain, but you want to optimize your physical function for athletics or even to be able to like, travel to Europe and carry your bags, anything you want to be able to do physically. And no matter why, we're able to diagnose what that is and then to help you optimize your physical body. And that can involve nerves or muscles or tendons or bones. So a lot of different systems that we're working on. And that's why it's kind of hard to know what we do because we really work on all the systems, including the brain, which I think is what we're going to talk a lot about today is how our physical body can affect our mental health and our brain and vice versa.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And I was also thinking about when I was doing the research, I was like, oh, it makes sense. Like sometimes people who do pediatric physical therapy are also doing kids with autism. They're seeing kids that are on the autism spectrum. They're also seeing kids that have Down syndrome. They're also seeing kids that are walking in a way that could impact their whole body through their life. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so much bigger than
It's
I
huge.
even realized. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a the thing that's so big about it is there's a spectrum of everything. There's maybe a child that has cerebral palsy or a child that just toe walks or W sits and that's the only thing. And it's actually a terminology, but they call it kind of the funny looking kid syndrome where we don't exactly know why, but their movement is just a little off or they're not having a positive relationship with physical activity. So we work on the entire spectrum of the physical body and how we move through space in
Yeah.
our lives. So yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we touch on this, but I think it would be important for us to talk about like why would kids especially need physical therapy? Like what might bring them to that? We mentioned the W sitting. Maybe you could touch
Yeah.
on that and
Yeah. So for physical therapy, I think most people think of physical therapy when they have pain. I mean, that's just pain is a motivator to go do something about something. And so when there's a pain point, it can be a mental pain point or a physical pain point, like, oh my gosh, my knee hurts, mom, or I sprained my ankle, or I had an injury in soccer. And I need to get through this pain and then learn to move better again so I can return to doing, whatever it is that I'm doing. That will take people to physical therapy. And then there are pain points mentally too. Like, my kiddo walks on his or her toes and people make fun of them at school and that's awkward. Or they don't seem to have the stamina to be able to, play tennis and pick up the tennis balls and put them on the racket and go around the court. They don't have the stamina or the coordination to do something like that when their friends can do it, or they're not being successful in, especially youth. Like there's a lot of group sports, right? And there's the whole like I'm on the playground and no one ever picks me, and that's now affecting how I relate to people, my popularity, my mental health. So there are a lot of reasons for someone to come to physical therapy, both from the pain points of actual having physical pain, or the mental pain points of like it's really affecting me socially.
Yeah.
And then a lot of parents these days are there's so much attention on group sports and club sports that a lot of parents are now treating their younger athletes as almost as professional athletes. I mean, when I was young, there was no club team, no one traveled. Those things didn't exist. And now at a very, very young age, I mean, freshmen in high school are committing to colleges for volleyball. I mean, it's just a totally different world. And so they're seeking physical therapy from a performance standpoint or a preventative standpoint very, very early. So there's a lot of points where people could seek physical therapy.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a fascinating thing because I agree. When I was a teen and I played sports, I mean, I was competitive, but it was just these travel teams were coming out.
Yeah,
We didn't travel really anywhere except for in our like metro area, but
right.
it was like a club team. It was like the first of that, but it was
Yes.
not what it is now. And there's so much competition behind it. And I think there's some mental health impacts for sure
Oh,
behind this. There is a lot of that. And I totally empathize in my practice. I see a lot of families and teenagers that are struggling with the impacts of how competitive it is. Like, and having a good coach is so important, having good
yes.
leadership, but it is very competitive. So I can understand why teens and their
Yes.
parents or even in middle school are coming to physical therapy to kind of improve their performance.
Yes. And sometimes it's hard for us because really at a certain age, different sports, especially the body develops in different ways. Like some athletes, it takes a very, very long time to develop, like a baseball player, right? He may not fully develop until mid 20s and 30s, where a gymnast, they're going to be sort of fully developed and almost retired and on their way out at 19, right? So
Yeah.
um, you're catching these young people at these different ages and stages, and that can come with a lot of pressure. And also it takes some of the fun out of it sometimes, right? I see a lot of things from like, where is there an outlet just to have fun and movement? There's a
Mhm.
study that was recently done. If a young person doesn't have a positive relationship with physical activity by the age of 7, they've done long-term studies, and most of those people become inactive and obese, which is our number
Whoa.
one. Metabolic health is our number one, killer and longevity effector in life. And so having fun, being physical, and having a good relationship with physical activity is really important, both from a mental health perspective and a physical health perspective, because a number one predictor of longevity is actually physical health. It's not your blood pressure or cholesterol or any of those things. So there's a huge movement in the future of like, how can we make these the younger population have a positive relationship with physical health? Because so much in the classroom is, sit down, be still. I mean, even though we're pushing for standing desk and we're pushing for fidgets in the classroom and just being able to move,
Mhm.
we're still in a place where it's just really difficult for our youth to find the time and the outlet that they need to move.
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
Yeah. I mean, and that's such an interesting take too, to like think about like fit families is starting young, right? Like taking our kids on walks, right, as little kids and
Yes.
incorporating that into our everyday busy activities. It's not just sports related. And I think a lot of times families see it as that, but it's really just moving, right? Like going to do
Yes.
something. I saw this I think it was an Instagram reel, and it was talking about this dad who he was like feeling disconnected from his kids. And so every day he would take one of his kids on a walk. And
Mhm.
he was talking about the positive impacts of that movement and conversation. And he was like, the goal that I have is to listen on this. So like, we're going to walk. And he's like, and I would hold my kid's hand. And I was like, that is amazing, right? Because that's building your relationship, building the like physical activity, right? But then also it's developing that connection, right? Like it's
Yes.
and allowing an outlet. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much in exactly what you just said, because and this is where I think it's a little bit lost on parents these days, is that we learn just as humans by mirroring and mimicking, right? And so if you're going on a bike ride with dad and dad says like, well, you need to wear a helmet, but dad doesn't wear a helmet, like that's what that kid sees, is it's really not that important, because I love dad more than anything in the world, but dad doesn't need a helmet, so I probably don't really need a helmet too.
Mm-hmm.
Or dad wants me to go outside and play while he's watching golf, but dad never really goes outside and plays. And so just the parental responsibility of you know if you want your child to be calm, you need to try to emulate calmness, right? And so if you want your child to be active and not have a metabolic disorder, I mean, we're seeing, diabetes at such early ages. We're seeing spine and disc herniations now at 14, 15 years old. We're seeing like degenerative disease type things in really young children. And I think probably leading to a lot of, mental health as a younger child or adult is more prevalent than it used to be as well. And a lot of this is because of lack of physical activity. When we move, we have all sorts of hormones in our bodies that are produced, that are both anti-inflammatory hormones. So it's how our immune system is stimulated, serotonin, dopamine, all these things that our brain and our body needs. And we can't get it any other way than moving. And it doesn't have to be a sport. It can be a walk. And you have to, they have to observe you doing these things as well. It just can't be them being told to go do it. It's got to be a family value and a lifestyle. And that's and we're all so busy sometimes. And then with our computers and our phones, and now I go to playgrounds, and it used to be parents playing with their kids and helping them down the slides. Now honestly, we've got a park right across from our clinic, and when I walk around at lunch for a break, the majority of the parents are head down on their phones and the kids are playing. No one's like playing with their kids anymore. And I'm not saying they shouldn't like independently be able to go play, but the kids need to observe the parents being active in some way too. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think technology, I have been reading a ton on this, and just like how much technology is impacting our own mental health as parents, but then also our teens' mental health and our children's mental health, and how desperate we are for that technology. And yet the thing we really want is connection. And so the connection piece is so critical. And so that's physical activity creates a shared connection, right? Of like, we do this activity together. And I know that my kids, we take lots of walks at our house. I'm not really a runner, but unless somebody's chasing me.
Neither.
But we do lots of walking, and it allows us to be just like present with each other and moving and those kind of things. But then also like, I think my kids will talk about like times that we did stuff together, and it's often when we're on a walk, right? And it's those kind of things, but we get dopamine, which is the feel good feeling from exercise, right? Like even if it's not exercise is just like physical movement. And
just physical movement.
Right. Yeah. And so my kids, sometimes when it's snowing, they'll be like, they used to when they were kind of littler, be like, oh, are we going to go out in the snow? And I'm like, heck yeah, we're going to go out in the snow. Like I mean, as long as it's not a blizzard, like we're going to like put our shoes on, we're going to dress appropriately, and we're going to go for a walk. Right. Even when I had an infant, I mean, I wore him on my chest, and he was in a, little suit and head covered and all the things. And he's warm as could be. He was probably the warmest of all of us. And, and so it's like getting out and moving. And now my kids don't question that, because they just know it's like, okay, we're going on a walk, and it's like, everybody's ready. It's like bikes, scooters, whatever.
Because
like,
it's what it's a family value, and it's what you do, right? I mean, it's, family dinner is just what we do. It's not a like, oh, this is strange. It's just what you do. And and it's walk in the rain with your kids. Some of my best kids' memories are of like, oh, remember when we had our rain boots on and we walked in the rain and we were splashing and then we were like, oh, we just got, like, and play and connection have so much research behind them. So just playing with your kids, it's not what you think it should be. And that's one of the hard things about all of these organized sports is that it takes some of the connection and the fun and the play out of it. I mean, these kids are hearing at such a young age, like, oh, well, you're going to go get a scholarship and, play college ball. Well, very few kids that are really good end up actually playing college ball because the burnout rate is so high in athletics. And, for someone to get to that level, I always say all my professional athletes I treat, there's some sort of obsession and compulsion, right? And I don't mean to like diagnose this, but you can only hit a golf ball that many times and, over and over and over again without having some sort of a drive to do so. So not everyone's going to be that type of a mover, but just general movement that's positive. And if the positivity is like, this is how I connect with mom or dad or brother or sister, great. Doesn't have to be an organized sport.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you think parents raise kids that want to be active? Like, how do we do that? What do you think are the tools or tasks in raising active kids?
I think it has to be positive, just like anything. I mean, if there's negative feelings or emotion around anything, food, activity, health in general, then people are going to be pushed away from that. And so you have to make it positive, which that also means that you have to, there's a lot of, I feel parents are inner loopers, right? They're in their own brain about, oh, well, my dad had diabetes and I don't want my kid to have diabetes. So we're going to put a 7-year-old on a ketogenic diet and my family doesn't eat sugar. There's so much kind of like inner looping that I think parents need some help sometimes to outer loop to look at their kids and how their kids aren't them, right? They're separate. They're the otherness of their child. Maybe I was a football player and especially the parents that didn't quite meet their sports goals tend to then have these accelerated sports goals for their children. It's interesting that the parents that tended to have played college or pro ball, they aren't quite as, because they went through the hard stuff, right? The, oh my God, practice. And it was so hard. And the reality of what it's really like to be a higher level athlete, that they don't quite push their kids as much as the parents who sort of did. They had a little bit of like a higher level mediocrity of a sport. They are like insane about their kids being really good at a sport. But you have to look outside of yourself and really look to see what your kid is capable of. And sometimes as a parent, you're not able to do that. And we find that in all sorts of things, whether it's a social situation where a parent wants their child to be able to act like a 25-year-old when they're 8, right? Mm-hmm. Or physical activity. They don't have the coordination or the skills. And so for it to be someone who becomes a physically active person, it can look a million different ways, right? And it's very similar to intelligence. We're all good at something. It just may not be the same thing. I mean, like personally, I was extremely good at science and English literature, but people assume people that are good at science are also good at math. I'm terrible at math. And so that was confusing to people. I'm like, no, I just don't get it. I mean, unless it's geometry or physics, I don't get it. So to sometimes in physical therapy, that's one of my favorite things to do is I'll have a parent and they're there to see me, but they're talking about their kid and how they just haven't found their thing or they keep going from sport to sport. And I said, why don't you bring him in and let me take a look at him? Because I can look at human movement and see what a person might be good at. And for example, one of my favorite clients was a physician and he had a really, he was in his mid 30s and had a terrible relationship with movement, like didn't make any of the teams, always got picked last. And then he had an injury and he had a knee surgery and I was rehabilitating him. And I could see there was just a real mental block on movement. And I looked at him and I said, did you do any martial arts? You've got the way your body moves. It's really beautiful. And I think being an illuminator is a really big thing too, like illuminating people's skills that other people can't see is a superpower of physical therapist. And I said, you can really move well in that sense. And he was like, no, I never did that. I never thought about that. I'm not good at movement. And I said, well, and I'm not a martial artist, but I know enough about how they move to start a little bit of, some single leg stuff, some movement of the legs, some movement of the arms. And he was all of a sudden, he like came alive. You could see him illuminate. And he was like, wow, this is actually like, I feel good doing this. I'm like, your body's made to do this. And he went on to get his black belt and wrote me a letter later and said, like, this is amazing. And now my son moves like me. And now I have him in martial arts. And so it just takes a person who is an expert in that field, which is human movement, to be able to highlight another person's ability, right? Everyone who is a human has ability to move well in some way. It just may not be the way that is an organized school sport.
Sure.
Unfortunately, there's like a socioeconomic issue with individual sports, right? Not everyone can do tennis, not everyone can do ballet, or not everyone can do taekwondo. So I would love in a classroom if we could start to, and I know that's super individualized, but if we could start to help kids, and I think this has to start with parents because it's not going to be in schools yet, but start to explore, what does your body's really special? What ways does it like to move naturally? Because if you look at most athletes, I was watching the reality show Full Swing about the PGA Tour and golf, and like Rory and some of the best golfers in the world, what they say is like, I was kind of just always good at it.
Mm-hmm.
It just really came naturally from a very young age. And then they get a coach like someone like me that will make them from good to great, but they were natural at it. And so we kind of have to find ways to help our kids be successful. Maybe they don't have the social skills to want to be on a team, sport league, right? Like maybe they're shy, or they're somewhere on the spectrum, or they have a sensory disorder. So they don't like how the tight shoes or cleats feel, or they don't like how, and we don't even think about that. Some kids don't like to do certain sports because they don't like how the uniforms feel. Probably parents out there listening right now have all experienced kids who like can't stand to walk in the grass without socks, or can't stand tags in their clothes. And the parents are trying to find like, okay, is there a sock without a seam? Or, sensory integration disorders are a huge thing and that affect physical movement and the classroom and all sorts of other things. So just getting to know your kid and seeing them for really who they are as a family will really help that your entire family have success in movement.
Yeah, I love this because this is really about getting curious, which is like the whole thing that I am pushing for in this podcast is being curious about your kids, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but getting to know your kid, each one,
Yes.
right? If you have several, on that intimate level of like being like, hey, you have been taking gymnastics lessons. Do you like this? What do you like about it, right? How does it feel for your body? Right? Because then we're promoting this positive message around physical activity. Because if they don't like it, let's find something else. I think, I don't know. I think there is probably a pull in both directions to like commit to something and keep going. I see the value in that. But also, like, physical activity is so important for your lifetime. This isn't just like about a commitment thing. This is about a lifetime of movement. And if we find the thing that really makes you
Yes.
feel alive and good, then that's fantastic. Like I love cycling. And so I like spinning classes or things like that. Like I love that. But I would never have known that that's something that I really liked until I had missed a class in something else. I can't remember what it was. And it was like the only class that was available, or like maybe a class was full. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. Right. Like I have no idea what I'm
Right.
doing. And then I was like, oh, I really like this. And so it's, I think getting curious, right, about what
Yes.
helps your kid to feel alive. Like my kids love to jump on the trampoline, and we have a rule that only one kid at a time because I like refuse to have a broken leg or arm
Right.
because of downhill bouncing, but like they love that. So it's like go and jump on the trampoline, right? And or we go on scavenger hunts, and just like getting moving is so
Yes.
critical, but it's also part of play and also part of development, right? Like we have so many milestones in terms of movement that we have in our life too, that it's so important to just move, right? Because it's so
Yes.
hard these days because we're fighting the TV, we're fighting the iPad, we're fighting those things. And if we
Yes.
can just create movement or expectations around movement and to be positive about it. And there are times that I don't like to work out. And I'm
Me
not
too.
like, yeah, I mean, I I like it afterwards. It's the afterwards, right? It's the dopamine that I get. It's the serotonin that I
Yes.
get, right? Those feel good feelings and the positive way that my body feels. I kind of like the pain a little bit, like that, like, wow, I'm
Yeah.
sore. I'm like, wow, I did something. My body is strong. And so like I'm always like trying to amplify that for my kids and be a good model. But it's hard sometimes where I'm like, I do not want to work out. Like the last thing I want to do right now is do an actual workout, but I'm like, I know I feel so good after it. So I have conversations about that with my kids too, is like, mommy works out because it helps my brain feel calmer
Yes.
and it helps my body feel stronger. And I like the way that that feels. So sometimes I do the physical part because I know that that is a beneficial part. And so my kids will be like, "Are you working out today?" And I'm like, "Oh, dang you." Right. Like, I'm like, "Yes, I am supposed to work out today." And they're like, "Oh, are you having a day that you don't want to work out?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." Right. Or I'm
Right.
like, I'm like ready in my like workout clothes or whatever. And they're like, "You're working out today?" I'm like, "Yeah." And so it's like, it's okay for our kids to see that those things are sometimes hard because it is sometimes hard to go to basketball
Oh,
practice. It is sometimes hard to go to soccer practice or volleyball or whatever your sport is. It is sometimes hard. But then also, like, it's sometimes hard to just go on a walk. And even though that seems so silly, it's like sometimes just hard to get out of that space. But I always feel better. And I think there's a lot of research that supports being in nature is so transformative for our mental health and so critical. So I think it's also that piece. Do you have any thoughts on just being out in nature and how that?
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of studies that show that being out in nature, I mean, it increases serotonin, you get the dopamine, you get your nervous system. We have our sympathetic nervous system, which is our, fight, the bear, big bad bear is after us. And then we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is I'm calm and there's no threats to me. Well, the thing that's so interesting in this world with the youth is that there there is a low grade sympathetic response. And what that means is it's not a big bear, it's a small bear. And we know it may not actually get to us, but it's like back there all the time, kind of watching us. And so we're kind of aware of it all the time. When we have a low grade sympathetic response, that is when we're driving, when we are texting, when, I'm on this podcast with you. It's when you're wondering what your friends are thinking. It's basically with the technology we have today all the time. And so your immune system literally cannot start fighting things like cancer cells, et cetera, things that aren't supposed to be there until you sink down into your parasympathetic response, which is I am completely safe. I have nothing to worry about. I don't have anything to be even alert about. And one thing that walking in nature does is put us into that our parasympathetic nervous system and and so that's where the research comes from, is that when we sink into that system, we are allowed to heal physically and mentally and emotionally. And there are very few things that help us get there. And there's a huge drive towards meditation, but there's a lot of us, let's say if you've got ADHD or you are sort of a high rev person, it's really hard to not have revving thoughts while you're trying to be quiet and not think, right?
Mhm.
And so sometimes the rhythm of the walk, it's like your circadian rhythm. It helps our brain and our body say, we're walking, we're safe, there's nothing around. And it helps us get to that place where we can heal mentally and physically. And that's where creativity comes from. If you never sink into that, it's hard to get good sleep. It's really the key to being a really great human, even your mood. But it's tough to find places where we can sink into that. So wherever and whatever you can do to decrease sort of your sensory arousal so that you can find those things. And movement is one thing that helps you do that. Now, if you are sprinting or on a treadmill or at a loud gym with bright lights, you're not going to get there. So that type of movement is going to do many, many good things for you, like, capillaries, so you don't have a heart attack, blood flow, the hormones, you're still going to have good hormones, the dopamine and the serotonin, but it's not going to help you with the deepening into more of a parasympathetic healing recovery. And the recovery is huge. I mean, we talk a lot about physical health, but recovery is if not more important, as important as the physical activity that you're doing. And it is hard. The other thing is, accountability partners, people you enjoy doing things with, because it is hard that, dopamine's tough. A lot of people have ADHD. They don't have enough dopamine. Dopamine is what gives us drive. And when you don't have the drive to get up and go to the gym or do something, it's really, really hard. And so for me personally, on days where I don't feel like going to the gym or I'm really tired and I know I need more of a recovery, I give it to myself and I try not to feel badly about it. And there's always tomorrow, and that's okay too. But it's about habit. It's about value. And that's where people have to go a little bit deeper. This is something that I do. This is something that we do because we value it, right?
Yeah.
It's just like anything else. I go to work. If you're a person who goes to church, if you're a person who exercises, it all becomes like, what's your family's value system? What do you value? What is your why? And then that makes it a little bit easier to get back to doing it because it's just a part of your family system.
Yeah, staying healthy, right? That
Staying
being the
healthy.
priority is health.
Well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Mental, physical, it goes together.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of change tracks a little bit, but I think, something I notice in schools is we just do not have a lot of movement. And I think we kind of touched on that earlier of like the standing desks and the fidgets and stuff, but how do you think the decreasing amount of time that our kids are at recess is impacting our kids?
Huge impact. I think it is one of the hardest dilemmas that we have currently in education. And then it's used as a punishment sometimes too, like, oh, well, you don't get to go out to recess, or you don't get to, go use the restroom if you need to. And so you can't say to a kid, you can't eat. Sorry, you don't get to have lunch today, right? You also shouldn't say to a kid, well, you don't get to move, because both are integral to well-being, right?
Yeah.
Movement is, I think, a way out of some of the issues that we're having in the school system today. And kids inherently need to move. If you follow sort of the evolution of human beings and where we came from, we are a very young species. Okay. It wasn't very long ago from an evolutionary perspective that we were walking 19 or 20 miles a day. And that's part of why that movement is so good for our brains and our body, and why so many good things happen when we move. As evolution carries on, we're going to get less and less of those things because we move less and less. And so the body is going to adapt itself to not need so much of those things. But currently, we're so young in our species that we still need those things for physiologically, the things that need to happen for us to be able to sit and pay attention, for us to be able to learn, for creativity to occur. Play is one of the biggest things that we need. And so for all those good hormones to happen within our brain and our body, we literally have to move. We have to. And so when you get to school and you spend 8 hours and you're in grade school and you get a 20-minute recess, that's not enough. It's just not enough. And so, we've put, a lot of emphasis on our curriculum and what is going to be learned and taught in a day. We also need to really revisit, if they think of movement in school as like, the older lady who's the gym teacher and it's just ridiculous and they're out doing, sprints on the track and they come in and no one knows why, or it doesn't have to be like that, right? When I was younger, we had the Presidential Physical Achievement Award, I think it was what it was called, and we had to do so many sit-ups and we had to be able to run a mile and so long, and you got your little certificate. I found mine the other day. It was pretty funny. I showed the girls. They were like, "What is this?" But anyway, um, now there's kind of no rhyme or reason other than I'm going to learn how to play football or lacrosse, or here's the rules of this sport. And I mean, that's fine, but really what time to move should just be about that. Get out there and move. And whatever that means to you, go do it, right?
Mhm.
Time to not have to think or be stressed. Time to just let your body do whatever it wants to do with freedom. And so I think that in the school system, it's a huge mistake. Now, I don't know how to solve the problem, Bryce. I mean, right? These things are huge, right? It's hard for us to get the curriculum we need to in a day. And I know a lot of teachers that are some of my best friends, they're dealing with behavior more than they're dealing with teaching. So it's a hard concept, but we're not going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think it's our mental health for our teens. We're also not going in the right direction. There's a lot of research coming out now about teen mental health, and I think my job has been needed more than ever before. And I think that should be scary for all of
Yeah.
us, and that we should be revisiting, like, what are we missing here? What has been added? What has been taken away? How do we get our kids back to being healthy? Because honestly, if I didn't have a job, if nobody needed me, I would gladly go do something else. And
Right.
I'm okay. I like having a job. I love what I do, but it's also that, like, I don't want so many people to need me or my profession, because we shouldn't need everybody to like need a therapist all of the time. We should be able to do things to help ourselves stay healthy, and also parents feeling like they have the skills, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast, because I want parents to have the skills to help their kids be healthy humans. But I do agree with you. I think we're not doing enough physical movement. We're not viewing movement as education. Play is the greatest way for us to
Yes.
grow as humans, especially kids, but adults too. And having
Yes.
fun creates positive hormones, right? Like, it creates a ton of good neural pathways. Like, there's so much benefit from it. And I think, yeah, the two of us are not going to figure this out, but I think
Yeah.
having parents start this conversation with their school about, like, how do we increase the movement? How do we get more movement breaks? How do we help? And because then that's going to deal with a lot of the behavioral stuff, right? Like, a lot of the behavior
Yes.
is you're not sitting, you're raising your hand impulsively or speaking out before you're supposed to, or whatever. And if we are moving more, those kids are more regulated, because movement helps to regulate. And so I do think that there does need to be a bigger conversation around this.
Yes. And
Okay.
I mean, it's so interesting if you have, it's obvious in other, when it's not a human, right? If you get a dog or a puppy and it's eating your couch and tearing up the floor, right? What do you know you need to do? You need to go take it to the dog park. You need to walk it. And then all of a sudden it's tired and it's not as, it's not doing so many things that annoy you. Like it's the same thing with a human. Sometimes we have to wear ourselves out a little bit.
Yeah.
But we don't think of it that way. We just see these behaviors and we're like, well, let's medicate it and we'll give some sort of a repercussion for the, I mean, and it's
Hmm.
just like, or you could just let them move more. So yeah, we're not going in the right direction as far as that goes. And I think it starts with parents. It starts with even before school, after school, right? I mean, a lot of parents are like, you come right home and do your homework right away. Well, you might want to let your kid move a little bit. They've been sitting and having to pay attention and having to regulate all day long.
Yeah. It's a
Um,
lot.
or they go straight from after school to a practice where they still have to regulate and they still have to pay attention and they still have to do things the right, they just need time to be free,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a huge advocate for physical activity, but I think also like non-structured, right? Where it's like you
Yes.
just move how your body wants to move, and kind of transverse that part of, like, you want to scooter, great. You want to jump, great. You want to shoot a
Swing in
basket,
the front
great. Yeah.
yard. Yeah,
Right.
whatever it
Like, whatever it
is.
is, right? And putting those things in place for our kids at my house, right? To have access to that, and going to the park and trying new things, and all of that. But I mean, it is so important, and this is such a multifaceted issue. So what do you want parents to
Yeah.
take away from this conversation, Julie? That we presented a lot of
Yeah.
challenges, right? What do you want them to take away?
I think to be curious and not judgmental about their children, right? Um, get to know your kids physically. Watch them move. What do they enjoy? Ask them what they will tell you, and you will just see their face light up. And if they don't seem to enjoy anything, get creative. And if you don't know how, seek help. Find someone who is good with kids and physical movement, and seek their help. Get online, find resources, because there are, from Quidditch, like people who liked Harry Potter,
Yes.
and now they're playing Quidditch in college, who never played sports before. I've got some clients that they're Quidditch players. I'd never heard of that, but they're like, yeah, I never did any sport, and now I go do this and it's so fun. It's like, well, awesome. Like, there's
Yeah.
a million different ways to be physically active. And start out, you need to find something for yourself, right? Therefore, they can have something to observe. It can be a family value system, and understand the importance of it, and don't make it a punishment. That's a big thing as parents. I have a lot of parents that are like, get out there and play, get out of the house. And it that's kind of negative. I'm not saying that you don't want your kids to go play, but help in finding something that they will enjoy, that's not necessarily like, you've got to get off your iPad and go play now, and that's now a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Try not to punish physical activity. But that's a big thing, because kids do love to move and want to move. You just have to be a little curious and creative in finding out ways that they enjoy doing it. And I'm not saying that's easy, but I do think it's necessary.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think just getting curious about our kids and being a good model. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Julie, for being here today.
You're
This was
so
such a great
welcome.
conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks again, Julie. That was all incredibly informative. I loved hearing all of your thoughts on movement and kids and how important it is. I think Julie said a lot of really great stuff. I think the takeaways are just being curious, like Julie said, in figuring out your kids' mode of activity, because it may not be what you are most active in, but it may be the thing that is best for them. So it might be martial arts, or it might be jumping on a trampoline, or it might be dance or gymnastics or football, but it also might be just swinging on swings or going for walks. And I think being aware of what makes our kids feel good helps them to develop a healthy perspective on physical movement. With that, I'll say thank you so much for your time today. We are so appreciative of you being here and listening to our episodes. Please subscribe and rate our show. If you like what we're doing, please share us with your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And we will see you next week. Have a great day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.